So it's not very often that a new product comes out and it's both the best of the best and also hundreds of dollars cheaper than the competition, but that's exactly what's happening right here. This is the new 390Hz Acer Nitro, and yeah, it's the best monitor that you can buy right now for competitive FPS, and it's quite a bit cheaper than those really premium 360Hz models. And that's a bit hard to believe, right? I mean, at first glance, this is just a really basic looking gaming monitor. There's no flashy RGB, there's no massive metal stand, and it just looks really basic. In a way, that's one of the reasons it's so good compared to the competition, and that also brings down the price. Whereas other 360Hz displays start at around $700 US, this one comes in at $500. That means pricing lines up pretty much identically to the Zowie XL2546K, which I've been saying is pretty much the rank 1 gaming monitor for competitive FPS for a while now, even against those more premium 360Hz options. Today though, I want to show you why I think this one currently beats everything on the market. So one of the main things that we look for in a gaming monitor for first-person shooters are response times, where faster pixel response times result in better motion clarity. For example, situations like if there's an opponent and they swing on you around a corner, or if you're just in a really close range gunfight with a lot of movement, you'll be able to see that movement a lot clearer if the monitor has fast response times. Now, one way that monitors can kind of cheat their way into making this movement look clearer is with a technique called backlight strobing. You probably know this as DIAC, ULMB, ELMB, MBR. Different monitor brands call it a different name, but they all work on the same principle. And that is that between screen refreshes, the LED backlight of the monitor, which shines light through the pixels, is turned off and then back on again when the screen refresh is complete. This means that during the time that the pixels are switching to their new colors, there's no backlight to reveal their old information, which, if it's on, usually results in what we know as ghosting. So what does all of this have to do with this new 390Hz monitor? Well, it's actually the motion blur reduction technology here that actually makes 390Hz worthwhile in the first place. Because, spoiler alert, this is using the same AU Optronics 360Hz panel that all of the 360Hz models currently on the market do have. And to summarize my feelings on that panel, it's really quick, but I do prefer something like a DIAC 240Hz Zowie instead, because the motion clarity there is actually a bit better. Basically, on those current 360Hz options, without any backlight strobing technology, you're just not really getting that motion clarity benefit that you'd expect from 360Hz, and in practice, everything kind of feels overly smoothed. But imagine for a second combining BenQ's DIAC with a 390Hz refresh rate on an IPS panel. Well, that's pretty much what you're getting here. Whereas the other monitors with this 360Hz panel do have backlight strobing modes, they're capped at 240Hz and run at a brightness which is too low or not adjustable. Here though, the brightness is solid and strobing can run at the full 390Hz, which is absolutely insane. So let's take a look at what we're working with, and as usual, we'll be using the moving UFO test from blowbusters.com. Firstly, a comparison here against the Asus 360Hz and the BenQ 240Hz, all with backlight strobing disabled. And since the Acer and Asus are using the same panel, they look pretty much identical, apart from the pixel overdrive settings being tuned a little bit differently between them. Here, what they both call the normal setting is just a little bit more aggressive on the Asus. But here's what enabling the strobing looks like on the Acer 390Hz, where you have two different settings, one called normal and one called extreme. The normal mode gives a slight boost in motion clarity, where we can begin to make out the separation between the white lamps on the UFO, but it's the extreme mode that I definitely recommend using. We do still see a bit of blur here on the trailing edge, but the clarity and detail is much better. We can now actually see the three individual pupils of the eyeballs on the alien, whereas with backlight strobing off, it's all just a blur. I'll also mention that I've used a faster moving UFO speed for these tests compared to what I normally use, which you can see here on the left. This way we can see the differences between these monitors a little bit easier. So finally then, let's compare the strobing mode against the Zowie XL2546K and the Asus PG259QN. So here we can see the true benefit of strobing at the insane 390Hz as opposed to 240Hz on the other two displays. Now at 390Hz, what's really interesting is that the clarity of the moving image isn't as good as the other options since the backlight isn't on for long enough, but it is still pretty good overall, but it's the natural looking fall off of the trailing edge that wins it overall. Whereas the Asus and Zowie have a really strong double image effect, the result on the Acer looks a bit more natural. Not to mention, now you can actually feel the difference in speed from 240Hz up to 390Hz, as you would expect since it's a monstrous increase of 150Hz, but honestly, it is kind of hard to notice that difference without the strobing mode enabled, especially in a game like Valorant where you can actually drive that amount of frames. The only way to explain it is that it feels like you're playing in real time with absolutely zero delay. There's no smoothing, there's no choppiness, there's no visual artifacting, everything just feels instant. It's noticeably clearer than the non-strobed image of the Asus 360Hz, and compared to the 240Hz BenQ Diac, you can tell that you're getting a lot more frames. Surprisingly though, even in games like Apex, which you need to cap at 240 FPS to avoid the game acting all weird, the 390Hz Acer felt slightly better than the 240Hz Zowie. Not sure why that is, but it seemed to be due to the faster refresh rate displaying the rendered information a little bit faster, even if it isn't displaying a completely new frame every time. The Acer 390Hz will also have the benefit of a lower input lag, but this is mostly relevant for those games that you can actually run at 390 FPS plus. Again, with the strobing tech here at 390Hz, the input lag is a few milliseconds faster than the Asus and the Zowie, and most of that comes down to the large refresh rate difference. Let's also not forget that this is an IPS panel, which means that colors and contrast are going to be a strong point on their own. Just like the Asus, the Acer has a dedicated sRGB mode, which is really damn color accurate. The white point is rock solid at around 6500 Kelvin, contrast exceeds 1100 to 1, and we get an average delta E below 1 and max below 3. So the difference between the intended colors that you see online and the rendered colors of the display are going to look identical to the human eye. For competitive gaming though, I would recommend switching over to the wide gamut mode, which can simply display a larger range of colors. For competitive shooters, that matters a little bit more than just having a flatter, more accurate looking image. Here we want the most vibrant and competitive looking image, so the wide gamut mode is what I would recommend. It doesn't get close to what a proper DCI-P3 display can do, but it's plenty good enough for competitive games. Especially compared to the Zowie, you have a lot more latitude here with color saturation on the IPS panel before the colors start to blob together and break down like they do on the TN. The brightness is also pretty decent for the Acer 390Hz. It does dim when you turn the backlight strobing on, and as a result can't get nearly as bright as the Zowie, but it is slightly brighter than the Asus with ULMB. At 240 nits, that's plenty bright enough in a dimly lit room, although during a bright day you might find that a little bit too dim. I will also note that brightness control with the strobing mode on is just extremely weird. First, you need to set a brightness value on the slider and make sure that the max brightness setting is turned off. Then go ahead and enable the strobing, and then also go back and enable that max brightness setting. It will then adjust the brightness depending on what you set on the brightness slider initially. You can't just go back and change this slider because it'll turn backlight strobing off, which is super weird, but hey, this is really the only way that you can get it to work. So yeah, the new Acer Nitro 390Hz. Really big fan of this monitor. It does fix most of the problems that I had with those really premium 360Hz IPS options. Despite using the exact same panel, it's just in a much better package, starting with being $200 cheaper. I mean, $500 is, not cheap for a 1080p display, but when it buys you the best of the best like it does here, I do think that is a fair price. One of the main reasons that it is $200 cheaper is because it doesn't have a physical G-Sync module, which those other 360Hz options do have. And I mean, we can talk about G-Sync on versus G-Sync off in another video, but most competitive gamers probably aren't enabling G-Sync at this refresh rate anyway, and screen tearing, as I've mentioned before, is really hard to notice at 300Hz plus. Another reason it's so cheap is due to the stand, which it's one of Acer's cheaper stands. You'll find this on their budget monitors, but I actually like it quite a lot, mostly due to the fact that it is nice and stable, doesn't bounce around a whole lot, gives you the adjustment that you need, which is height and tilt, but best of all, it's not going to take up a massive space on your desk like those really premium 360Hz options do. So yeah, big fan of this display. If you are interested in it, I will leave it linked down below in the description. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.